The marble floor was cold and clean, the way only money can make things look. Marcus Webb stepped through the glass doors of Cornerstone Federal Bank on a Tuesday morning in October, and for a moment, he just stood there. Breathing. Taking in the high ceilings, the polished counters, the soft hum of climate control that kept the air at exactly the right temperature for people with exactly the right amount of money. He hadn't been inside this building in over 20 years. He looked different now. Older. His leather jacket was worn at the elbows, the kind of wear that comes not from style but from years of actual living. His hands, thick and slow at 71, held a manila folder against his chest like a shield. Inside that folder was a loan application, filled out in careful, deliberate handwriting. 3 pages. Every line answered. Every box checked. He was nervous. You could see it in the way he adjusted the folder. The way his eyes swept the room before settling on the teller line. He hadn't expected to be nervous. He was a man who had once run through the jungle at night with bullets cutting through the air around him. He was a man who had buried his wife 6 months ago, and somehow gotten back up. He was a man who had, a very long time ago, done something remarkable in this exact city. But today, Marcus Webb was just an old black man in a worn jacket, walking toward a loan officer's desk with a dream folded inside a manila folder. Nobody in that bank knew what was about to happen. Not even Marcus.to understand what happened that Tuesday morning. You have to go back. Not all the way. Just far enough. Marcus Webb grew up in the east side of Grover City, in a neighborhood where the streetlights flickered and the landlords never answered the phone. His father worked 2 jobs and still couldn't save. His mother kept a jar on the kitchen counter where she put quarters, nickels, dimes, whatever was left after the bills. She called it the someday jar. Marcus never asked what the someday was for. He figured it was the same someday everyone on the east side was quietly waiting for. He was drafted at 19. Vietnam. He came back at 22 with a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, and a silence about him that people who hadn't been to war couldn't quite read. Some thought he was cold. He wasn't cold. He had just learned that certain things didn't need to be said out loud. What Marcus came back with, besides the medals, besides the silence, was an idea. He had seen, in those years overseas, what happened when people had nothing to depend on. When there was no structure. No institution that belonged to them. He had watched men fall apart not because they were weak, but because there was nothing underneath them to hold their weight. He came home and he started talking to people. Reverend Amos at First Baptist. Old Dr. Clarence who had his office above the pharmacy on Holt Street. A woman named Iris, who would later become his wife, who was teaching 3rd grade and keeping a notebook full of the names of families in the neighborhood who couldn't get a mortgage no matter how hard they worked. They met in church basements and kitchen tables. They argued. They planned. They drove to the state capitol twice and got turned away twice and drove back and kept planning. And in 1984, they opened Cornerstone Federal Bank. It was a small thing at first. A storefront on Clement Avenue with 2 teller windows and a second-hand desk. But it was theirs. Built on community deposits, on church funds, on the savings of people who had been told by every other bank in the city that their money wasn't quite good enough. Cornerstone grew. Slowly, then steadily, the way anything real grows. By 1990, it had moved into the building on Hargrove Street, the one with the marble floors. By 1995, it had 3 branches. By 2001, it had been acquired by a regional banking group, the kind of acquisition that came with a very large check and very polite lawyers and a quiet erasure of everything that had come before. Marcus had used his share of the acquisition to pay off the mortgages of 11 families on the east side. Then he went back to what he loved, which was working with his hands. He and Iris had opened a small bakery. Nothing fancy. Cornbread and sweet potato pie and the best peach cobbler in the county, if you asked anyone who'd ever tried it. Then Iris got sick. And then Iris was gone. And the bakery, their bakery, the one she had named Iris and Webb's in her own handwriting on a sign above the door, sat waiting. Marcus couldn't let it die. He just couldn't. So he filled out a loan application, tucked it into a manila folder, and walked through the glass doors of Cornerstone Federal Bank on a Tuesday morning in October. He didn't tell anyone who he was. He didn't think he needed to. Derek Calloway had been branch manager of Cornerstone Federal's Hargrove Street location for 4 years, and in those 4 years, he had developed a very precise instinct for exactly one thing: who was worth his time. He was not a cruel man, exactly. He was the kind of man who had convinced himself that efficiency and cruelty were different things, and had stopped examining the space between them. He dressed well. He kept his desk neat. He had a small framed print on his wall that said "Excellence is a habit," and he genuinely believed it applied to him. He was 38 years old. He had gone to a good school and gotten a decent degree and worked his way up through 2 other banks before landing here. He had never, not once, worked on the East Side. He had driven through it. When Marcus Webb walked through those glass doors, Derek Calloway was standing near the teller station reviewing a quarterly report. He looked up. He took in the worn jacket, the slow careful walk, the manila folder. He made a calculation. It took about 4 seconds. He did not go over to greet Marcus himself. He flagged down a junior loan officer named Priya and nodded in Marcus's direction. "Walk in," he said quietly. "Probably a personal loan. Run him through the standard screening." Priya was new. She did as she was told. She sat with Marcus for about 15 minutes, going over his application. She was polite. She asked her questions carefully. But somewhere around the 10-minute mark, she excused herself and went to find Calloway, because the loan was for a business, the bakery, and business loans were above her clearance level. Calloway sighed, set down his quarterly report, and walked over. What happened next was witnessed by 4 people in that branch: Priya, a teller named Jerome, a waiting customer named Mrs. Helen Park, and a young man named David Osei who was at the ATM alcove and could see the desk clearly through the glass partition. All 4 of them would later remember it the same way. Derek Calloway sat down across from Marcus Webb and picked up the application without looking at the man who had filled it out. He scanned it. His expression was the careful neutral of someone who has practiced looking neutral. "Mr. Webb," he said finally. "Marcus Webb." "That's right," Marcus said. "And this is for a bakery." He said the word bakery the way some people say hobby. "Iris and Webb's. On Clement Avenue. My wife and I opened it 11 years ago." A pause. "She passed earlier this year. I want to keep it going." Calloway nodded slowly, as though processing information of very little consequence. "And your current income?" "Social Security. Some consulting work. I've got the figures there on page 2. Calloway turned to page 2. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "Mr. Webb, I have to be honest with you." He leaned back slightly. "Your debt-to-income ratio here it's not ideal. For a business loan of this size, we typically look for—" "I know what you look for," Marcus said quietly. "I've been in banking." That got a small smile from Calloway. The kind of smile that isn't really a smile. "With respect, sir, community credit unions and commercial lending are quite different." "I didn't say a credit union." Calloway paused. Looked at him for the first time, really looked. Then he continued as though the interruption hadn't happened. "The property you're listing as collateral, the bakery building. Do you own or lease?" "Own." "And the assessed value?" "It's there on page 3. Calloway turned to page 3. He studied it. Then he set the application down on the desk and folded his hands on top of it, which was, Marcus would later reflect, a very specific gesture. The kind that says, "This conversation is already over, I'm just waiting for you to understand that. Mr. Webb, I want to be straightforward with you because I think you deserve that. His voice had taken on a texture, gentle, patient, the way you speak to someone who needs things explained slowly. Given your age, your current income profile, and the nature of the business, our risk assessment committee is going to have a very hard time with this application. I don't want to send you through the full process only to come back with a result that's going to be discouraging. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. You haven't run my credit, Marcus said. I can see from the preliminary. You haven't run my credit, Marcus said again. Same tone. Same pace. You haven't called my references. You haven't verified the property value. You've had this application in your hands for 4 minutes. The lobby had gone very quiet. Calloway's expression tightened. Just slightly. Sir, I have a great deal of experience evaluating. You've evaluated my jacket, Marcus said. And you've evaluated my age. And you've evaluated, he paused, and the pause said everything, whatever else you evaluated when I walked through that door. A silence. Calloway slid the application back across the desk. I'm going to be honest with you, Mr. Webb. I don't think this is the right institution for what you're looking for. There are community programs, non-profit lending organizations that might be better suited. Charity, Marcus said. Resources. For people in your situation. Marcus looked down at the application. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he picked it up, folded it carefully, and placed it back inside his manila folder. He stood up. Thank you for your time, he said. He said it with perfect dignity, which was the most devastating thing he could have done. Calloway watched him walk toward the door. He was already reaching for his quarterly report. He did not notice that Marcus had stopped at the door. He did not notice that Marcus had turned and looked back at the building, at the marble floors, the high ceilings, the polished counters, with an expression that was not anger, and was not sadness exactly, but was something older and quieter than either of those things. He did not notice the old key that Marcus turned over once in his coat pocket before pushing through the glass door and walking out into the October air. But Jerome, the teller, noticed. And Jerome went home that night and told his mother what he had seen. And Jerome's mother called her cousin Patricia. And Patricia Webb was Marcus Webb's daughter. Patricia Webb drove to her father's house that same evening. She found him in the kitchen, not cooking, just sitting at the table with a cup of tea that had gone cold. The manila folder was on the table beside him. She sat down across from him. She didn't say anything right away. She had her mother's patience. Tell me, she finally said. He told her. When he finished, Patricia sat quietly for a moment. Then she said, Daddy. Do you still have the founding documents? He looked up. The original Cornerstone papers, she said. From 1984. He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up slowly and went to the hallway. Patricia followed him to the base of the attic stairs. She heard him moving around up there for a few minutes, the careful sounds of an old man navigating boxes and memory. He came down with a metal document box. Olive green, with a small combination lock that he opened without hesitating. Inside were papers. 40 years old, some of them. The smell of old ink and older intention. Patricia spread them on the kitchen table carefully. Articles of incorporation. The original charter. A founding agreement signed by 7 people, with Marcus Webb's signature at the top, large, certain, nothing like the careful handwriting in the loan application. And there, on the 3rd page of the charter, a clause that the acquisition lawyers had apparently considered irrelevant and had therefore never removed from the institutional record. Patricia read it twice. Then she looked up at her father. Dad, she said carefully. Did you know this was still in here? I knew, he said. And the key? He reached into his coat, which was still on, and set the key on the table between them. Brass. Old. A small tag attached to it, handwritten, Cornerstone Federal, Founding Director. Patricia stared at it. "What do you want to do?" she asked. Marcus picked up his cold tea. Took a sip anyway. "I want to sleep on it," he said. But neither of them slept much that night. Patricia Webb was a paralegal who had spent 15 years working for a civil rights firm in the city. She knew how to read documents. She knew how to find things that people thought they had buried. The next morning, she drove to the county records office and spent 4 hours at a microfiche reader and a public access computer terminal. What she found was this. The 2001 acquisition of Cornerstone Federal by Hartwell Regional Banking Group had been conducted through a subsidiary. That subsidiary had later been absorbed into another entity, which had been restructured twice. But the institutional charter, the original legal framework of Cornerstone Federal, had never been formally superseded. It had been amended, yes. Many times. But in the amendments, through either oversight or arrogance, a specific provision had survived intact. The provision designated the founding board members, all 7 of them, as permanent advisory directors with standing access rights and consultation privileges that could be invoked within 30 years of the original charter date. The charter had been dated March 3, 1984. Patricia did the math 3 times to make sure she hadn't made an error. Today was October 14, 2024. 30 years from March 3, 1984 was March 3, 2014. Her stomach dropped. The window had closed. A decade ago. She sat back in her chair and stared at the ceiling of the county records office. The fluorescent light buzzed. A woman nearby was printing something. Patricia thought. Then she pulled up the amendment history again and read it more carefully. And there, in an amendment dated 2009, not the original charter, but an amendment ratified under the Hartwell subsidiary, was a clause that had been added, probably by a tired lawyer at the end of a long day, probably as boilerplate, probably without anyone reading it closely. It extended the consultation and access provisions of the original charter by 15 years, effective from the date of the amendment. 2009 plus 15 years. This year. Patricia's hands were very still on the keyboard. The window hadn't closed. The window was still open. Barely. By weeks. She called her father on the drive home. She kept her voice even because she had learned, from years of legal work, that the moment you let your voice shake is the moment things become emotional instead of strategic, and right now she needed it to be strategic. "Daddy," she said. "I need you to listen to me very carefully." They didn't go back to the bank right away. Patricia knew better than that. Walking back in there with documents and emotion would accomplish nothing except giving Derek Calloway the satisfaction of calling security. No. This had to be done right. She called her firm. She wasn't technically employed there anymore, she had moved to independent work 2 years ago, but she still had relationships. She explained the situation to a senior partner named Catherine Marsh, who had spent 30 years in banking law and had a voice like someone who had never once been surprised by human behavior. Catherine listened to everything. Then she said, "Send me the documents." Patricia sent the documents. Catherine called back 2 hours later. "This is legitimate," she said. "Unusual, and they'll argue it, but it's legitimate. The 2009 amendment extended the provisions. Your father has standing access rights and consultation privileges under the original charter as amended. He is, for all intents and purposes, still a recognized founding director of Cornerstone Federal Bank." "What does that mean practically?" Patricia asked. "It means that under the charter, he has the right to request a formal review of any institutional decision that affects the community mission of the bank. He has the right to access certain institutional records. And," Catherine paused, "he has the right to present before the board." A silence. "The board as in Hartwell Regional?" Patricia said. "Hartwell Regional, as the successor entity, is bound by the charter provisions they absorbed in the acquisition. Their lawyers should have cleaned this up in 2001. They didn't. That's not your father's problem. Patricia let out a breath. How do we proceed? She asked. You send a letter, Catherine said. Formal. Certified mail. Addressed to the Board of Directors of Hartwell Regional Banking Group, with a copy to the branch manager of the Cornerstone Federal Branch on Hargrove Street. You cite the charter provisions. You request a formal response within 15 business days. And then? And then, Catherine said, with what sounded almost like satisfaction, we see what kind of institution they really are. The letter went out the following Monday. Patricia sent it certified mail, return receipt requested. She also emailed a copy to 3 journalists she knew. Not to publish. Not yet. Just so they had it, Derek Calloway received his copy of the letter on a Wednesday. He read it once, standing at his desk. Then he sat down and read it again. Then he called his regional supervisor, a man named Frank Ellison, who worked out of Hartwell's main office 40 miles away. Frank Ellison read the letter and called their legal department. Their legal department called Catherine Marsh. Catherine Marsh did not return the call for 2 days, which was a choice. When she did return it, she was pleasant and clear and utterly immovable. The charter provisions were legitimate. Her client, Marcus Webb, was exercising his rights under those provisions. He was requesting 3 things: a formal apology from the branch manager for the conduct during his loan application meeting, a full and fair review of his loan application by the board's lending committee, and the opportunity to address the board directly on the subject of Cornerstone Federal's community mission, as was his right under the founding charter. 3 things. The legal team at Hartwell spent the next week trying to find a reason to deny all 3. They found nothing. On the 12th day, Frank Ellison called Derek Calloway. That conversation was not pleasant. Calloway had, by this point, reviewed the founding documents himself. He had looked up Marcus Webb's name in the institutional history. He had found the old photographs, a grainy image from a 1984 newspaper, 7 people standing in front of a storefront on Clement Avenue, the sign above the door not yet installed, everyone smiling the way people smile when they've just done something that scared them half to death. Calloway had stared at that photograph for a long time. He recognized the eyes. The same eyes that had looked at him across that desk and said, quietly, without anger, "You've evaluated my jacket." Calloway didn't sleep well for several nights running. On day 15, Hartwell's legal team sent a letter accepting all 3 requests. The board meeting was set for the following Friday. Marcus Webb spent the Thursday night before the board meeting doing what he always did when he needed to think clearly. He baked. He went to Iris and Webb's. His daughter had been keeping it open part-time, with the help of a young woman named Kezia who had learned the recipes from Iris herself, and he baked through the night. Corn bread. Sweet potato pie. Peach cobbler, which required patience and a particular attention to the fruit that Marcus said you could not rush, no matter what. Kezia was there with him for part of it. She was 24, studying business administration at night school, and she had adored Iris Webb the way young people adore people who take them seriously. "Are you nervous?" she asked, at one point, watching him peel peaches with the calm of someone doing a familiar thing. "No," Marcus said. She waited. "I was nervous the first time," he said. 1984, walked into the State Banking Commissioner's office with a folder of papers and Reverend Amos beside me and no idea if they were going to laugh us out of the room. He set a peach aside. "After that, not much makes me nervous." "What if they don't listen?" Kezia asked. Marcus looked at her. "I've been not listened to before," he said. "You know what I did? I went and built something so big they had to look at it." He went back to his peaches. Kezia wiped her eyes and pretended she hadn't. At 2 a.m., Marcus locked the bakery and drove home. He hung his worn leather jacket on the back of the bedroom door, the same place he always hung it. Then he opened his closet and took out something he hadn't worn in a very long time. The Hartwell Regional Banking Group's regional headquarters was a glass and steel building on the north side of the city, the kind that made itself look important by being reflective. Conference Room B was on the 14th floor, with windows that looked out over the city spread below. There were 9 people around the table when Marcus Webb walked in. He was wearing his dress uniform. Not the full military dress, he hadn't worn that since Iris's funeral. But the jacket. Dark, precise. His medals on the chest, the Purple Heart, the Bronze Star, and 3 others that people who knew what to look for could identify without being told. He was clean-shaved. His shoes were polished in the way that only people who learned to polish shoes in the military ever really polish shoes. He was carrying the metal document box under one arm. Patricia walked in beside him. Catherine Marsh walked in on his other side. Derek Calloway was already at the table. He had been told to be there. He was in his best suit. He looked like a man who had recently understood something about himself that he hadn't known before, and was not sure what to do with the information. The board chairman, a man named Richard Holt, stood when Marcus entered. The others, following his lead, stood as well. Marcus sat down. He set the document box on the table. He folded his hands on top of it. "Mr. Webb," Holt said. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for having me," Marcus said. "I'll try not to take too much of your time." He opened the document box. He set the founding charter on the table, the original, not a copy. Then he set 3 other documents beside it, the 1984 newspaper photograph, the 2009 amendment, and the signed partnership agreement from the original founding board. He looked down the table. His eyes found Calloway. Calloway held the look for 3 seconds, then looked down at the table. Marcus looked back at the chairman. "In 1984, Marcus said, I sat in a different kind of room than this one. Smaller. No view. 7 of us around a card table with the kind of folding legs that wobble if you lean on them. A few people at the table shifted in their chairs. We'd been trying for 3 years to get a bank chartered in the east side of this city. 3 years of being told the community wasn't viable. That the risk profile didn't support investment. That there wasn't enough capital." He paused. What they meant was that there weren't enough people who looked like us living in the kinds of houses that made banks comfortable. The room was very still. "We built Cornerstone Federal anyway. Not because it was easy. Because it was necessary. Because 63 families in our community applied for mortgages at other banks in this city between 1980 and 1984 and received 63 rejections." He let that number sit. 63. And when Cornerstone opened, 41 of those families got their mortgages. Within the first 2 years. He looked around the table. "That is what this institution was built to do," he said. "Not as charity. As banking. As the core function of what a bank exists to do, put capital where it can grow, in the hands of people who have the will and the capacity to grow it." He looked at Calloway again. "Last month," he said, "I walked into the branch on Hargrove Street with a complete loan application for a small business. A bakery. My wife's bakery, which she ran for 11 years and which employs 3 people and serves a neighborhood that has been in this bank's community mission charter since 1984. His voice didn't rise. It stayed at exactly the same level, which somehow made it more powerful than shouting would have been. I was turned away in under 10 minutes. Before my credit was run. Before my references were contacted. Before my collateral was verified." He paused. "I have a 791 credit score. I have no outstanding debt. The bakery property is owned free and clear. I have 3 years of profitable business records in this folder." He placed the manila folder on top of the other documents. The room was very quiet. "I'm not here for an apology," Marcus said. "Well," he glanced at Catherine, and something in his expression shifted, just slightly. I understand an apology is on the agenda, and I'll accept it if it's offered sincerely. But what I'm here for, what I'm exercising my right as a founding director to appear before this board to say, is this. He leaned forward. 40 years ago, we built something in this city. We built it because people needed it. Because capital was being withheld from people who had every right to it. Because someone decided, without running the numbers, without checking the facts, based on what they saw when they looked at a neighborhood, that investment wasn't warranted. He looked at every face at the table, one by one. I am asking you, not as a supplicant, not as a charity case, not as an old man in a worn jacket, I am asking you as a founding director of this institution, under rights that your own legal team has confirmed I hold, to look at the numbers. Run the credit. Check the collateral. Do the job that this bank was chartered to do. He sat back. That's all I have. The room remained still for a moment. Then Richard Holt spoke. Mr. Webb, he said, and his voice was different than it had been at the beginning. Before we proceed to the loan review, he looked at Calloway. The look lasted about 2 seconds. Then he looked back at Marcus. I believe Mr. Calloway has something he'd like to say. Calloway cleared his throat. He looked up. His eyes met Marcus's. Mr. Webb, he said. I made assumptions. About you. About your application. That were, he stopped. Started again. That were wrong. Completely wrong. And unprofessional. And I'm sorry. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes after something true has been said. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. Once. All right, he said. The loan was approved. Not as a favor. Not as a settlement or a gesture. The lending committee reviewed Marcus Webb's application, his actual, complete application, with his credit run and his references contacted and his collateral verified, and approved it in full within 3 business days. His credit score, his debt profile, and the bakery's financial history made it, as one committee member noted in the official record, a straightforward approval. Iris and Webb's reopened at full capacity on a Saturday in November. Marcus was there from 4 a.m., the way Iris had always been, getting the cornbread started, letting the sweet potato filling come to temperature slowly so it didn't crack. Kezia was there. Patricia was there with her 2 kids, who mostly got in the way and ate things and were told approximately 6 times not to touch the cooling racks, which they touched anyway. The line stretched down the block. Grover City's local paper ran a story. A reporter named Angela Cho had been one of the 3 journalists Patricia had contacted weeks earlier, and Angela had been waiting patiently. She wrote it carefully, not as a scandal piece, not as a gotcha. She wrote it as what it actually was, the story of a man who had built something, watched it change hands, and then walked back through its doors decades later, still holding a key, still holding a belief that the thing he'd built was worth fighting for. The story got picked up. It traveled, the way true stories travel. Derek Calloway was moved from his branch manager position. The bank's internal review cited a pattern of preliminary screening practices inconsistent with fair lending standards. He did not lose his job entirely. Whether that was justice or mercy depended on who you asked. The Hartwell Board commissioned a full audit of loan application outcomes across all Cornerstone federal branches over the previous 5 years. The results were not comfortable reading. They led to changes, new training requirements, new oversight procedures, a community advisory board, which Marcus, when they asked him, agreed to chair. He showed up to the first advisory board meeting in his leather jacket. Someone asked him, afterward, why he hadn't come in wearing his uniform again. Why he hadn't led with the medals and the military history and the founding documents and made the whole thing as large and undeniable as possible from the start. Marcus thought about it. Because that shouldn't have been necessary, he said. A man walks into a bank with a clean application and a legitimate business. That should be enough. That should have always been enough. He paused. I needed it to be enough. I needed them to have to reckon with the fact that they failed before they ever knew who I was.